Hello there! Welcome to Skeleton Q Productions. I'm Kwame Grazer Kokon. Let's get into the video. In today's video, in light of the election that's taking place on Tuesday, with the US presidential election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, we're going to be discussing political polarization and the potential for there being a second civil war. And that's not an exaggeration, that's not me over fluffing things here. We're getting some of the stats like in this video. You'll kind of see that actually this is a major problem, and no matter, I assume that whoever's going to be watching this, it's probably chances are you're going to be, because I'm releasing it on a Sunday, chances are you're going to be watching this after the election. But my sincere hope is that no matter who has won on Tuesday, that they're able to actually help bind the nation together again, because even though I'm not an American, what happens in your election has fundamental effects on what happens to the rest of the world, and yeah, certainly the rest of the Western world is facing similar phenomena. So we're going to get into that in this video. So just off the bat, right, 80% of people are married to people, so 80% of Americans are married to people who have the same political ideology as them. 75% of children have the same ideology as their parents. So, and one would broadly expect that if you're entering a relationship with someone that, like, you have similar values, if you raise your children, they tend to have similar values, but this is where it starts getting a bit dicier, when it's like, what would you be happy with your child like having, right? So in 1960, roughly 4.5% of Americans, so this is the average of both Democrats, Republicans, Independents, etc., right? Only 4.5% of them said that they would have a problem if their son or daughter married someone from the different party. That figure in today's figures is now a third of Democrats and half of Republicans would be unhappy if their son or daughter married someone of a different political party. So that's not good. That's quite a jump, isn't it? Now, part of why people are feeling this kind of intensity of opinion towards people of different parties is the simple fact that the political parties have gone to each. They've fallen more along ideological lines than they were in the period in the 60s, right? In the post-war world, probably because the nations had to come together, and so there was a sense of camaraderie and stuff, yeah. So I suppose in the light of that, if you see the different political parties, whether it's the Conservatives and Labour Party in Britain, whether it's Democrats and Republicans in America, etc., they tend to have similar policies, and they only differ on very minutiae, or just in how they have the same end goal. They just disagree on some of the little things of how to do it and stuff, right? So actually, most there'd be some distinction between people who are more right leaning and some people who are more left leaning, but it wasn't as big of a thing. And also many of the kind of cultural issues that kind of came to light in the 60s and 70s, yeah, this is what really divided people, and you'll observe this in your own life and stuff. It's one thing if you're having a debate with someone, close friend or family or whatever, on economics, yeah, and you're arguing about the top rate of tax, or about whether capitalism is a good thing or socialism is a good thing, etc. You don't tend to get such heated debates with regard to that, yeah. Whereas as soon as you kind of go into social issues tend to be a lot more personal and everyday kind of things, yeah, in terms of your stance on say for instance gay marriage or immigration or abortion, or etc., all these kind of things. They end up being very polarizing issues, and it's a thing of there's not really much kind of room for compromise as such with some of these issues. So that's part of why we've seen such a schism. So just to drill down with some of the data, actually, right? So in 1994, 10% of Americans were consistently liberal or conservative, right? So this is a thing of, in the different parties, yeah, people and any like kind of like rationally thinking person, genuinely has some views which are left leaning, and some views that are right leaning, and some views that are liberal, and some views that are conservative, right? So it takes a certain type of ideologue to be consistently one thing or consistently one another, and those type of people tend to then view anyone else who's even slightly to the left or right, like depending on who they are, right? They view them as being from the other camp. It ends up becoming very tribal and becomes very us versus them mentality, and you can see this with anyone who's on either end of the kind of on either end of the political. I don't want to say extreme because extreme is a loaded term, but people who are consistently one thing or the other tend to view everyone else as being in the other camp, right? So it's either you're with us or against us kind of thing, which is very kind of two-dimensional, very kind of, it's not a very good way of looking at the world as such. But so it goes from 10% in 1994 to 21%, in 2014. So in that 20-year period, you saw the amount of people who are consistently one thing or another more than double, right? So now if we drill down into the different political parties, we can find this. In 1994, the average Republican was 64% more conservative than the average Democrat, right? And in 1994, the average Democrat was 70% more liberal than the average Republican. So this is something that you like broadly expect. One party is more conservative leaning, one more party is more liberal leaning. But there's many people. You have liberal Republicans and you have conservative Democrats. And again, even within like Britain and stuff, even though you have the Conservative Party, you still have many people in that who are quite like left leaning on economics and like liberal on social issues, and then vice versa with regard to the Labour Party, right? However, by the time it gets to 2017, we now find that 95% of Republicans are more conservative than the average Democrat. We find that 97% of Democrats are now more liberal than the average Republican, right? So again, what things basically, like what things kind of majorly cause this, And again, it is the social issues, right? It's things like abortion, but more importantly, you see attitudes to race and attitude towards immigration drastically shift, right, in this time. So before all this, prior to 1990s, you find that both in Britain and America, etc., because this is it's before this before the era of multiculturalism and stuff, where it was kind of like this big celebrated thing. It was a thing of, the populations were relatively more homogenous than they are today, and it was a thing of, broadly speaking, people were like, well, we want immigration, but we don't want too much of it. And in terms of like race and stuff, it's like, well, we've gone through the 50s and 60s and 70s and stuff, so all the kind of major obstacles that are stopping black people, for instance, from getting ahead have been removed, at least on paper anyway, right? So it's a thing of, the attitude is quite a hard stance here, that a lot of like white voters in both places have, where they basically go, well, the reason why there's crime or like unemployment or poverty in the black community, for instance, is because of a lack of personal responsibility. They need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and if they do that, then they'll be fine. So this was, so these two opinions on immigration, that we want it controlled and we want it to be relatively low, and that basically minorities need to kind of like take care of themselves, rather than rely on other people and stuff, right? These views were like just common across both parties, right? Especially amongst white voters. However, when you get to like the 1990s, and you get to the 2000s, and especially by the time you get to the 2010s, right, you end up with these issues becoming more and more polarized within the different parties. So you find that Republican and conservative voters end up being more and more like wanting tighter immigration and being more like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, while more liberal parties such as the Labour Party or the Democrats end up going in the opposite direction. We go, no, actually we need to give more support to people, and actually we don't mind if we have like mass migration. So the schism between that, and this is kind of what you see. This is what you see with the Trump vote. This is what you see with the Brexit vote. It's this polarization. It's no longer really the debate being between left and right. It's more between like kind of nationalism / patriotism versus internationalism, right? So or globalism, as one could call it as well. So it's these are now the new fault lines, yeah. And it took up until like 2016 really for all these things which have been bubbling under the surface for a long time to really come to fruition, to really be like, actually there's a grand swell of people who, regardless of whether they vote Republican or Democrat, Labour or Conservative, the same type of people who are globally minded, who are internationalists and stuff, yeah, they are the ones running things. And actually the more nationalist ones, the more patriotic ones were like, actually, hold on, our sovereignty is being taken away by this internationalism. We want to take back control. We want to make America great again, etc., etc. And so this is what we can clearly see. So now it's quite interesting that one can quite accurately predict in this day and age, like what party people are going to vote for, and also what their stances on other issues are going to be, because we see this rise in consistency in both parties. Like it's a thing of like one can guess from one's stance on, say, gun issues, yeah, like on gun rights in America, you can guess with quite a great deal of accuracy what someone's stance on abortion will be, what someone's stance on taxes will be, what someone's stance on like kind of immigration, like kind of like Black Lives Matter, all these kind of things, right? So like the level to which there's very little overlap. There's very little kind of things that Americans and British people, etc., have in common. It's making it more and more difficult. Like as George Washington said, a house divided cannot stand. And as there's more and more of this polarization, as there's more and more of these two camps going into like separate things with very little overlap, it's a thing of actually what do people really have in common. But is this necessarily a recent phenomenon? Is this like the first time this happened in our history? No, like kind of pretty much before like World War One, World War Two, it was a thing of actually there was a whole heap of polarization, kind of like in America and in Britain and stuff, right? You know, issues don't simply go away yet, and it took until you have like these massive world wars and depressions, etc., that pull everyone together. And so, unfortunately, it seems like if there was to be, the only way that this will sound strange. The only way that it seems to, the only way I think we probably could pull together is if there is another massive war, and that's going to be at extreme cost, both in terms of life and resources. And so, hopefully, there's more peaceful ways in which we can kind of like break down these barriers, which we'll get into like throughout the course of this video. Also, another thing that people always talk about, they go, oh, it's the media. This for me is one of the greatest chicken and egg kind of debates ever, whereby people go, oh, it's because like Brexit happened because of the Daily Mail, or like kind of, or Trump happened because of Fox News, or this happened because NBC or CNN and BBC, you know. And it's like, well, let's think about this, yeah, right? This is not the Soviet Union, right? We're not all forced to read Pravda. We are not all forced to just listen to whatever propaganda's coming through the radios and stuff, right? People in a free market go, you know, they vote with their feet, they vote with their wallets, yeah. And so if you're walking into a shop and you want to buy a newspaper, you're gonna read a newspaper that's gonna have opinions that are similar similar to your mindset. Yeah. Otherwise, you're gonna like if you ever try and read a newspaper that has views that you fundamentally disagree with, you should do that because it allows you to have a better insight into what different people are saying. But it can be quite frustrating at times. You end up pulling out your hair. Like I just want the news. I don't want all of this spin on it that that I fundamentally disagree with. Because there's spin in pretty much all media, even ones that try and say that they're neutral. But in reality, you have to kind of sift through. You have to listen to both sides of the argument and stuff, right? And what quite a lot of people are doing now, and actually the internet in some way amplifies this, just because it's such a free market. There's no the cost to entry is pretty much negligible, right? And so people go, actually, I'm just going to get my news from where I want to get my news, and an algorithm predicts based on past behaviour. So they'll go, oh, you like listening to liberal stuff, we're going to give you more liberal stuff, and you listen to conservative stuff, we're going to give you more conservative stuff. Now, people criticise with the algorithm and say, oh, well, why does it kind of do that and stuff? Yeah, the reality is that it doesn't, from a logistical standpoint, it doesn't make sense to, if someone is clearly liberally minded, yeah, and you start giving them loads of conservative things to try and balance it out, pretty much a lot of people are just gonna be like, no, it's okay. So it's kind of a waste of time to a large regard. There's elements to which you could drop in little bits, you could drop in little questioners, you could little tiny things that make people question their things. So if someone's more conservative, you could drop in little things that just make them question a little bit, and vice versa. If someone's a bit too liberal, then you go in little bits that make them have to question their own beliefs. So I think that's what it all comes down to in the end of the day. It's like what Descartes said, yeah, in terms of question everything, yeah, and especially your own views. Your views, as we've worked out, 75% of people, 75% of children have the same views as their parents. It's like, well, okay, how much is your political viewpoint based on what you've come to for your own conclusion? How much of it is just you going, well, mummy and daddy told me to believe this, and all my friends believe this as well, so it must be right. That's quite a juvenile way of looking at politics, but unfortunately, as the stats show, quite a lot of people are clearly just going with the crowd rather than actually stopping and think why do I believe this? And I think that's much more of a healthy thing in the democracy for people to actually question their own beliefs. In terms of this predictability and stuff, so studies have actually shown this year that the media. There's no evidence that the media is to blame for this polarization. Yeah, people watching Fox News are going to watch something like Fox News anyway, right? And if you got rid of Fox News, they would either consume no news at all, or they would find something else which is more to their liking and stuff, right? But you can pretty well predict how people are gonna vote, even from where they choose to live. So, for instance, 65% of Republicans, right, want to live in big houses which are far away, which are spaced out and far away from things, yeah, right? Because they like to have space, right? And 61% of liberals want to have relatively smaller houses, but they want to be in the action. They want to be very close to different things, right? So pretty much what you're seeing nowadays isn't a thing of north versus south or whatever, right? It's now more of a thing of actually city versus countryside, right? And you see this again and again, in elections, and referendums, etc., etc. You see that outside of the major urban centres, the support for many of these more liberal ideas fall very short. And so rather than it being Rust Belt states, well, I suppose in that regard, they have been battlegrounds and stuff, yeah. But it's not so much on a regional basis that certain places are battlegrounds. It's more the suburbs are now the battlegrounds, and And this election will either be won or lost in the suburbs. Also, it's a simple fact that, over the last 40 or so years, trust in institutions have completely collapsed and stuff, right? So as you've had, prior to the 1960s, not many people had televisions, and so hearing things on the radio, there's only a handful of channels. You can present things in a clearer way, etc., right? And it's easier to kind of mold a sort of narrative. When you have TV and people can kind of see with their own eyes a lot of the stuff that's going on, whether it's the Vietnam War or protests, etc., it becomes a lot seeing as believing as such, yeah. So if people kind of if people see some of the more shady things that these politicians and other people in the institutions doing, it becomes a lot easier to realize, oh, actually they're human beings, they're not on this mad pedestal, they're not morally kind of superior to us and stuff, right? They're flawed, and oftentimes many of them are corrupt, right? So because of that, plus with the age of the internet and stuff, right, again we see more and more of this in country after country. The more that people have access to the internet, the more they start to distrust their government. They start to distrust lots of different institutions and stuff, right? Because people can see the flaws in the things, and it's also a thing of it still is important to trust institutions, because without them, then it becomes almost impossible to live in a advanced society and stuff, right? So reading out some of the stats here, so this just gives you an idea in terms of how things have shifted over the last few years, right? So the Supreme Court, for instance, in America, right? In 1986, you had Justice Scalia. He was chosen by 98-0, so unanimously across the Senate. Yeah, he was approved, right? Moving forward to 2018, when you had Brett Kavanaugh, he got through with just 50-48, and it was very, very much along partisan lines, right? And you see this in vote after vote after vote. Yeah, from the 90s onwards, it becomes more of a thing of actually, rather than there being a cooperation between different parties and a bit of overlap, it becomes more and more of no, everyone's voting for this, everyone's voting for that, right? So for instance, with Obamacare, 0% of Republican congressmen, or senators voting for it, right? So it starts to become very, very polarized. So for instance, trust in the presidency is now down at just 37. Trust in the Supreme Court, 37%. TV news, 20%. Congress, 11%. So think about it, what was designed to be the most democratic institution in the whole of the US, right? Where it's, in theory, it's supposed to be representative of the people, and yet just 11% of people actually trust Congress, right? Meanwhile, the military and the police have 74% and 54% respectively of trust that people have in them. So this doesn't bode so well when countries start going down this road. And I don't want to be apocalyptic with this, but it's a recognition that actually, where civil society starts to break down, where things become more and more polarized, we start to see real problems, and we start to see real divisions, and we start to see real hatred and stuff. This whole thing of, for instance, never kiss the Tory, or people unfriending people, or relationships people having divorces and stuff based on how people voted in Brexit or for the Trump election and stuff. It's a thing of, it's now starting to get to a point where it's like two tribes going to war kind of thing, right? And it's getting very vitriolic and very nasty, and it's not hyperbolic to say that it's heading towards civil war. So America has not been this divided since the Civil War, and what one finds time and time again in countries around the world where they start going towards civil war, America is already at that point, right? It wouldn't take much for the election on Tuesday for things to majorly kick off. Depending on who wins, well, actually, regardless of who wins, I don't see it going in a very nice way. You're seeing at the moment, for instance, what's going on in Portland, Oregon, with what happened over the summer, in the Chaz, something autonomous zone, can't remember now. You know, things like that, and the kind of the flares up all across the country with different riots, and like, you know, there's a recent one in Pennsylvania. Yeah, I stumbled over my words there. So, you know, it's, and then you got the Proud Boys, you got these people, you got you know, it's getting very tense. And what I will say is, with regard to, say for instance, I don't want to like wish this upon America, but if we look at the Spanish Civil War, for instance, yeah, and how that started off, you had people on the far left like trying to basically take, like, you know, trying to like impose things on Spain and stuff, right? And the military and many of the institutions within Spain were like, no, we're not doing that. And so what you end up having is, you know, the rise of the military, and you ended up in the end with Franco being the dictator, right? So this is a common theme throughout developed nations. So if one looks at it, any place where communism has taken root, it's always been in largely peasant like societies, yeah, like underdeveloped, like kind of like largely agricultural societies. In any industrialized nation where there's a fear of communism, or a fear of kind of like radicalism in general from the left, it always ends up being countered by a much larger, much more organized, and much more aggressive like kind of reaction on the right. And so I'm not saying that, like, you know, we're on the road to fascism and stuff, yeah, but it's a thing of, you know, if you think about it, every single institution is now not respected in America, and the only ones that are the police and the military. So if things kick off, who are the only people who are going to be able to bring order to the streets? The police and the military. So, and how do the police and military lean? Well, they lean Republican. So, you know, so if it does kick off, it's quite clear which side is going to win. There's multiple different alternative histories and hypothetical things of like who would win in a civil war between Republicans and Democrats. It's not looking pretty for the Democrats at any point, right? So there's a recognition that actually, like, you know, any side that thinks that like they can kind of like antagonize it, and you know, and even if like Republicans and stuff, yeah, like or conservatives, whatever, you want to win, as Jordan Peterson says, you want to win like a series. You want to win a series of games. You don't just want to win one game. Yeah, you want to like keep playing so that you keep winning as many games as possible, right? So if you go down the road of upending the constitutional republic, if you go down the road of completely like destroying what America was founded to be, or what Britain was founded to be, it's a very Pyrrhic victory, and it comes at a cost of, well, you'll never have what you had before. You'll never have the kind of freedom that you had before, right? And whoever ends up rising to the top of that is not going to be some sort of like liberty-minded like person stuff. Yeah, you're going to end up with a tyrant. You're going to end up with a military junta. You're going to end up with someone like pretty much stripping away all the freedoms that you're now fighting for. So for both sides need to move away from the precipice, and we're going to get into how like I think that the people can. But before we do all that, what we have to do now is like, comment, subscribe. I know that the comment section here hopefully should be lit up, because yeah, it's quite a contentious thing that we're talking about and stuff, and it's a very important topic. You know, this channel over the last few months, it has really grown into something that I'm very, very proud of. And yeah, jump on the bandwagon. Yeah, you see like how we're doing things here. We see we ain't going nowhere. But I tell you, we won't stop. I can't remember how that song goes. Why's my brain just gone? Anyway, never mind. So I've not had enough coffee. But I'm waffling now. But to stop me from waffling, what you need to do right now, pause the video, go down into the thing. If you're not subscribed already, subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends, etc, etc. Let's get this thing popping. Brand new whip just happened. I got options. Anyway, back to the point. So, right, I realised from watching that advert again, that actually I haven't been combing my hair. So yeah, I should have checked in the mirror beforehand. Hopefully it's not too bad. Anyway, back to the point. So there's also so how exactly do we go about trying to like heal these divisions, right? So this is part of the problem we have to overcome. So in 1994, yeah, antipathy between Democrats, yeah, to Republicans. So 16% of Democrats had a very unfavorable view of Republicans, and 17% of Republicans had a very unfavorable view towards Democrats, right? Now in 2017, well, not now in 2017, by the time it gets to 2017, it's now 44% of Democrats have a very unfavorable view towards Republicans, and 45% of Republicans have a very unfavorable view towards Democrats, right? So where does some of these things start breaking down? 57% of Republicans and 67% of Democrats have a lot of friends from their own party, right? 55% of Republicans have few or no friends from other parties, and 65% of Democrats have no to few friends from the other parties, right? So that's if you want to know if you want to be anyway, whatever. Getting too distracted now. If you want to see as a clear example why these things are breaking down, if almost half the country has a very, very unfavorable view of people from the other party, that's, the only way to counter that is to start having more friends from other parties. Yeah, talk to them about these issues. Don't go on off on a huff. Don't go and unfriend them and stuff. Yeah, speak to them, debate with them. Yeah, like, as long as you're dealing with good actors, you're not dealing with people who are lying about things, like who are intentionally lying about things. Because in terms of facts and alternative facts, like those things do actually kind of exist. Yeah, there are certain facts that you will listen to because they come from certain sources, and there's certain facts that you will dismiss because they come from other sources because you don't trust the credibility of them, right? So, like, if people are saying things which are blatant lies, like they've been like fact checked and etc., and it's like, no, that person, and if it's like, make that point to them. If they still bunk it down and they go no, and they're refusing, or if anyone starts getting nasty, if anyone is purposely like saying something which they know to be false, yeah, but which pushes the narrative, yeah, these people are kind of bad actors, yeah, and so you want to still speak to someone, like you can, if you're a Democrat, you can still speak to someone who's a Trump supporter, yeah. If you're a Remainer, you can still talk to someone who's a Brexiteer. If you're a Brexiteer, if you're a Trump supporter, you can still talk to someone who's a Democrat or a Remainer and stuff, right? It's not that deep. Like, actually, like, have friends, go on dates, like marry people, have kids, whatever. Like, broaden your horizons, because otherwise what you end up doing is you end up in a bubble, right? If everyone's just in a bubble and only listen to like one side of the thing, yeah, right? Some things you naturally will be like, I'm conservative on this and I'm liberal on that. But if you start just going into these bubbles, yeah, you'll end up suppressing things which you know in your head to be right, yeah, right, from where you're coming from, just because, oh, if I say that, if like I'm consistently liberal with everything, but I think that people should be able to own guns. And on a vice versa, be like, I'm consistently conservative, but I think that immigration's a good thing. You know what I mean? Like, this is not helpful. Like, kind of like, people need to be able to express themselves, to believe what they want, to like do their own research into things, and come to their own conclusion without feeling the need that you're going to be excommunicated, that you're going to just be cast off and exiled and stuff, yeah, just for having views which are like wrong views, yeah, like kind of like, wrong thought, right? They can't run like that at all. So that would be my first and like probably best advice, yeah. Next bit of advice would be actually to challenge yourself, actually listen to different viewpoints, yeah. Do some research, like watch some of my videos, yeah. If you want to know about conservatism and you don't actually, if you're arguing about conservatism and you don't know anything about conservatism, or you're arguing about liberalism, you don't know anything about it, yeah, probably check one of my videos out about the history of liberalism, or the history of conservatism, or the history of because when knowledge is power, yeah, and the more that you know about these different things, the better, even if you disagree with them, the better you're able to argue with it, yeah. If you can't understand where someone else is coming from and why they came to that conclusion and stuff, yeah, if you can't get that in your head, then that means that there's no conversation, then there's no learning taking place, right? You need to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's called empathy, right? Because otherwise, how are you actually going to actually be able to engage with them and actually learn for yourself and be like, actually, oh, that person thinks that way, like I disagree with them because of X, Y, Z, yeah, rather than just like, oh, I just don't like them. Okay? See, and the reason why we need to do this is because if we continue that going down this road, yeah, right, okay, 2016 was crazy, right? 2020 is likely to be crazy as well. Do we want to keep having this every 4 years, yeah, like where it becomes this fight to the death kind of thing, yeah, right? 2024, what's that going to be? 2028, what's that going to be, yeah, right? If we keep going down this road, it's going to be a thing where America is ungovernable, Britain is ungovernable, and then that happens, yeah, guess who fills in the gap of that? China, communist China ends up filling the gap of that, right? Countries around the world here which look at us with envy and with spite are going to be like, right, they're tearing each other apart now. Now it's time for us to move in. Now it's time for us to do what we want. So the whole reason why the world order that we live in at the current time, you might not see it from the news, might not be able to, but actually this is the freest, most prosperous, most peaceful time in the existence of human beings ever, period. Yeah, look it up. I'm not just fluffing those figures. Look into it and stuff, right? And that has only been achieved because you have hegemony of the United States and the Western world in general, which say, actually, no, you can't just randomly start invading countries, yeah, like kind of, no, you can't just start building empires, no, you can't just do this, you can't do that, yeah, us having this kind of liberal world order and stuff, yeah, and God knows that it has flaws in it, yeah, like it's not perfect and it's incredibly hypocritical at many times. You can't bring freedom and democracy at the barrel of a gun, of course, right? But the point is this, right? If Britain and America collapses, the world is not suddenly going to be all sunshines and rainbows, right? It's going to be a worse world. It's going to be a more depressing world, and it's going to be a more violent world as well. And that's not just because, oh, I'm British, so I'm saying that, and oh, look at me, I'm chauvinistic. It's like, no, objectively speaking, yeah, anything that one could hold dear to oneself, you look at, you can't compare the world that we live in to utopia, because you're always going to be like kind of disappointed. You have to compare us to what the alternatives are. It's not to pat ourselves on the back and say, oh, look at us, we're brilliant. It's a fact of actually what we have here is a very rare and very unique thing, and we are very blessed to be born to a country which have these things, which have these institutions that are normalized, which have freedom of speech, which have freedom of, the fact that you're even able to criticize the government and say, oh, I don't like that president, etc., etc. Ronald Reagan always said that this joke here. He's like, an American speaking to a Soviet, like to a Russian, and he said, oh, like kind of, oh, like in America, like I can go to the president's desk, pound his desk, say, Mr. President, I don't like the way you're doing your job, and the Russian guy goes, I can do that, and he goes, oh, you can, and he's like, yeah, okay, yes, yeah, I can go to the Kremlin, I can pound on Gorbachev's desk and say, Mr. Gorbachev, I don't like the way that President Reagan is running his country, right? It's that kind of joke, right? It's that kind of thing of, in most countries in the world, you cannot criticize the government. You cannot say certain things. In many countries, you can't freely exercise your religious practices, or if you have no religious practices, you can't express those either. Like, the freedoms that we are born with, yeah, should not be taken for granted. We're only one generation from losing our freedom. That's always been the case. Freedom is a fleeting, very rare thing in the history of the world, right? And so in a country or in a civilization which has those freedoms, yeah, it needs to be guarded against. And so we're not talking like ancient history, yeah. Like, okay, so the approval rating, yeah, for George Bush Senior, so obviously the father of George Bush Junior, was amongst Democrats. 51% of Democrats had a positive approval rating for him, right? Now that it's Donald Trump, it's down to just 8% of Democrats having a positive view of him. And if we compare, for the Republicans, 23% of Republicans had a positive approval rating for Obama. So when you think about Fox News and all the people getting onto Obama throughout those 8 years, it still was a fact of actually even then almost a quarter of Republicans still had respect for the president. And then but comparing that 23% with the 46% that President Carter had, you think about Carter, people always make jokes about how incompetent he was, about how he's one of the worst presidents, etc. But even still, 46% of Republicans had respect for Jimmy Carter when he was president. So if we start into, if every election is like this, it's just going to be chaotic. It's going to just become worse and worse and more toxic. And then when people stop consenting to for an election to take place, there's a certain level of trust, that, oh, my side lost, we'll do better next time. If it becomes a thing of actually no, we're not accepting the side that won, and we're the side that lost, it ends up becoming a thing where actually the trust in the whole democratic process then starts to break down, and then we don't have anything at all. That's at that point. Then that's when we're at the thing of we're at the point of civil war. At that point, so things that we discussed some of the things that I think can bring people together, but I think ultimately, we have to decide as British people, as Americans, as democratic people and stuff, living in the 21st century, we have to decide what we want the future of our countries to be. And in reality, we all have to move together. I'll repeat the line from George Washington, that a house divided cannot stand, right? Our countries cannot continue to exist if we continue to go down this path, right? It will fracture, it will split into chaos and into tyranny, right? So if we can't work out a way of inclusively bringing together the country and just as happened in the world wars, where we go, hey, doesn't matter where you're from or this or that, is that we are American, we are British, right? And you could disagree with some aspects of things. You can disagree with you can disagree with tax policy, you can disagree with what you think the rate of immigration should be, etc., right? But the fundamental things of, do we want this country to carry on existing or not? Those are things where we need consensus on. And do we want to continue to have a democratic process? Do we want to continue to have a multi-party democracy where people have freedom of speech and freedom of association, etc., because if we just want to triumph and crush the other side, and never ever give them a chance to ever win an election and ever to come to power, then it becomes a thing of, well, at that point, then we're heading towards we're heading towards tyranny, and it's very, very difficult to come back from that. Once liberty has been extinguished in a place, it's very, very difficult for it to naturally come back, and sometimes it can take centuries, if at all. So, with that being said, I hope that you guys have really enjoyed this video. Please give me give me your opinions in the comments section, and share this about, because I think this message, especially at a really polarized time, we really need to start working out how we move forward from this and how we come together and stuff. And that's not some wishy-washy, man, let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya, bro. It's more just actually from a strategic standpoint, we need to work out what we're doing from this point on. And so hopefully this conversation becomes part of a wider conversation that needs to be taking place at this time. So that being said, bye.